Oh shit, here we go again.
Indeed, here we are again. Welcome. Some of you OGs may remember my video where I guessed the maxes of every TF2 character on the big three lifts, those being the flat bench press, the back squat, and the deadlift. That was all the way back in February. On that video, I actually saw a few comments talking about Saxton Hale and other characters within the Team Fortress 2 universe. Little did they know that I was actually intending to add Saxton Hale at the end of the video for fun. But at last minute, before going through with it, I decided to stop at Spy and just make it about our beloved 9 classes. This video, on the other hand, will be the video where I go through 9 of the non-playable characters within the Team Fortress universe, doing 9 to kind of match the tone of the original one a little bit. Of course, Saxton Hale will be on the list, but I'm not going to tell you who else will be on the list. I mean, I guess you can cheat and scrub through the video if you wish, but you're just cheating yourself at that point. Before we get into this, I'm going to guess based off of perceived height, weight, and other indications of how strong the characters are. I'm going to assume that these are normal people. The last time I did the video, people brought up stuff like Australium and how that could impact the strength of the characters. For example, I believe I said Scout could deadlift somewhere around 405, 4 plates. Some people brought up the fact that since it's the TF2 universe, with all the wacky elements and unrealisticness that goes on there, Scout could potentially deadlift 3 times that. A big point of contention was heavy, which in hindsight I probably would have bumped up his deadlift about 100 pounds, but anyway, it's all guesswork. There isn't going to be too much in-depth analysis, like I'm not going to kind of dig through every little thing and think about every single leverage, though I'll kind of take that into account, I guess, just kind of look at them, see a couple characteristics and make a guess from there. If I know something specific about the character, I will potentially use it to influence my guess, but a lot of it will be guessing based off of how they look and assuming they're not on some crazy chemical enhancement like New Zealandium or whatever, 10 times more potent than Trembolone, because, it's the TF2 universe. If I was to see this person in real life, knowing what I know, what would my guess be? Make sense? I know I explained it like 10 times, but I have to just make sure that's understood. Okay, I have talked enough. Let's move over to the platform to review our first contestant.
Saxton Hale!
Of course, I have to start off with everyone's actual favorite souped-up Australian, that is also actually Australian, Saxton Hale. I legit just talk about assuming these are normal people and whatnot, possibly implying that they are natural. Is Saxton natural? I do not believe Saxton Hale is natural, even inside the Team Fortress 2 universe. I was looking through photos, and maybe at one point, look at this picture right here. Looks like an above-average dude, like in his early days, but he is most definitely not natty anymore, and they seem to exaggerate his features. Increase the size of his shoulders, increase the size of his chest. Now he has very visible abs, whereas he really didn't back then. So, yeah, I don't think he's natty anymore. Maybe at one time he was. I could definitely believe the first picture was natural. But after that, nah. This guy is not natty. And I don't care that all Australians have mustaches and testosterone levels above 2,000 nanograms per deciliter in the TF2 universe. Hale is most definitely saucing. With that taken care of, let's guess his age, height, and weight. As for age, personally, I couldn't find anything. I'm not a comic fanatic. Maybe there was something written somewhere and I just didn't see it. Though based off his looks, he's probably in the ballpark of his early 40s, maybe mid to late 40s tops. You could tell me he's in his late 30s as well, I'd probably believe you, but I'm going to go with like early 40s. Once again, the TF2 universe could be deceiving me. I'm not 100% sure. For height, once again, it seems to shift depending on the art. In-game, when compared to Heavy, who's about 6'5", standing in the nucleus door frame, and then comparing that to Hale, standing in the same doorway, the difference seems to be about 4 to 5 inches. In the comics, he seems about the same as well, like as he does in-game. It doesn't seem like he was scaled up or scaled down. I always got the impression that Saxton Hale was like 8 feet tall or something. And while he still is tall, likely around 6'10", which is what I'll list him at, it is technically feasible for someone to be the same height as Saxton. So, you got guys like Hapthor Bjornsson, he's 6'9", built pretty similar to Saxton, so, it's definitely possible. Anyway, assuming he is 6'10", It is now time to guess his weight. I did this a little bit unconventionally. Instead of guessing a number, I guessed his BMI and went from the number that was most correlated. Based on his build, people around his size would likely have a BMI between 32 and 36, due to his impressive amount of muscle mass and the fact that he is not natural at all. On the low end, he probably weighs close to about 305 pounds or 138.3 kilograms, and on the higher end, he likely weighs closer to 345 pounds or 156.5 kilograms. We'll take the middle and say he weighs 325 pounds or 147.4 kilograms. Time for the lifts. We'll start off with every high schooler's favorite exercise, the bench press. I believe originally I started with squat. This time I'm going to go with bench, then go squat, and end it with deadlift. Thought I'd shake it up a little bit, and everybody cares about bench, so let's start with bench. Saxton Hale is a big dude and has a large chest. He has very thick arms, which will help him with the support of the weight. He has a large back, which helps him also. People overlook that. A big back is a big foundation, and training the back will actually help improve your bench press. So if you are a gym rat, make sure you are training back as well if you want to increase your bench. It seems weird, but it's true. I mean, look at all the major benchers. They all got big backs. You need a big back. It's a big foundation. Seriously. He also has solid leg development, so his leg drive ought to be pretty solid as well. We also know he has a lot of power because of the time he punched that PSI reader thing on the wall with his left hand, and not even as hard as he can. He is like stupid strong. To be honest, I think Saxton Hale is beating any real bencher in the world. And the reason I brought up the boxing part is just because it's supposed to show that he has a lot of power. The current world record for the heaviest bench press is 796 pounds by Julius Maddox. I may be wrong. I believe that is out of competition. I believe in competition it's around 780 something. I'm not 100% sure. I'll put it on screen if I remember. But still, I think Saxton Hale would, stand somewhere around there. I'm going to give Saxton Hale 8 plates and some change, bringing his total up to 825 pounds for his bench press 1 rep max. It could be significantly higher. Saxton Hale is unbelievably strong, killing Yetis in a single punch and making them explode. Though I'm not exactly sure how much that correlates over to bench press. It likely does a little bit, but I'm going to be a bit conservative and say Saxton Hale can bench 8 plates, a 25, and a 5 on each side for a grand total of 825 pounds, or 374.21 kilograms. So he's got a big bench. Now for the manliest lift, the squat. Squat is really difficult due to a multitude of factors. I know he has that stomp ability that legit shakes the earth beneath him, though I'm unsure if this is Saxton exclusive ability or if he has some sort of device that allows him to do this. But knowing Saxton, it's probably just his thunder quads absolutely demolishing the earth beneath him and dismantling the crust. And I also have no idea how in the world I would measure this to relate to a squat. So, he fights jungle animals, putting them overhead and crap. It's insane. Saxton is nowhere near any human. Honestly, I think Saxton would likely just max out the bar or get really close on squat. So after seeing how many plates can fit on a bar, it seems the max would be close to about 2,000 pounds. I'm going to say the high end is 2,000 and the low end is the world record around 1,300. So I'm going to kind of take the average like I have a lot of times. Saxton Hale could probably squat 18 plates, 18 45-pound plates, which is just ridiculous, putting him at about 1,665 pounds or 755.23 kilograms. This could be way off, I'm not even sure, but when it comes to the CEO of Manco, we can never know for sure. Wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that 18 plates is just a warm-up and not a max. Who knows, it might even be his behind the neck shoulder press or skull crusher. I mean, Saxton Hale is stupid strong. Either way, Saxton is, I hate to repeat myself, but true, is strong, and I'm going to say that he can squat more than any living being in the world at 1,665 pounds. Squat's great, but people don't like squats. Now for everyone's truly favorite lift, and I think it's a little bit overrated. Sort of. I got mixed feelings about this lift. But whatever. Deadlift. This is, of course, going to be his most ridiculous lift weight out of all the lifts. so knowing how much for sure is once again a shot in the dark. Though there is this one part in the comic where he seems to be easily holding up a Yeti. We don't know how much the Yeti actually weighs, but assuming it's about the weight of a fully grown gorilla, I would say it's about 500 to 750 pounds. And that's while holding it in one hand. It is taxidermy, I believe, which significantly lowers the weight, but still very impressive. I'm going to make a complete guess here and say Saxton could likely deadlift 5 extra plates when compared to a squat, which, while it is a lot, is pretty reasonable when we're talking about a man who can squat 400 pounds above everyone else who's ever existed. And that's just like a middle guess, like it might be a lot higher. So I'm going to say that Saxton Hale could likely lift over a ton with a weight of 2,115 pounds, or 959.34 kilograms. It is somewhere between 2,000 and 2,400 for sure. And that will do it for our Natty Vegan Flyweight King Saxton Hale. He's got some impressive lifts. I'm going to go with the guesses I have here, though I guess you could say my more realistic guesses, not taking into account Saxton Hale being Saxton Hale. His deadlift would probably be closer to 1,100 pounds, his squat would probably be a bit over 1,000, and his bench would probably be about 700. But this is Saxton Hale. We know a lot about Saxton Hale. We know that he's just basically a demigod, so my numbers are going to stand here. Anyway, I've been talking long enough. Let's move on to number 2 on the list.
Falling here. Take the gloves off for this one. Actually, keep the gloves on. It might get messy.
Yep, it only makes sense who would come next. Very involved with the Team Fortress 2 mercs. People have even said she should be the 10th class. Actually, the 11th behind the guard dog. Kidding, of course. But let's look into Miss Pauling's gym stats. First is age. Once again, I don't believe there's any confirmation for the age of Miss Pauling. Hell, we don't even know her actual first name, just her initial. Though, I guess there are some mercenaries like that as well. So, I guess it's not too weird. Anyway, judging off of how she looks, I'd assume she's approximately the same age as Scout, maybe a tad bit older, or even a tad bit younger, but I'm leaning towards a bit older, closer to Sniper's age. If you didn't know, Sniper's only a few years older than Scout. It's weird to think about, but yeah, he's actually one of the youngest mercenaries. I'm going to say, at least at the start of TF2, Miss Pauling is in her mid to late 20s, though I'm leaning more towards mid 20s, if not early 20s. As for height and weight, once again, there's nothing official. The comics aren't the best thing to go off of because the scale isn't always exact, but it's what we got. This panel right here, I think, is the best since it's like it's a straight shot, straight panel. I forget what I took a whole class talking about angles, but I don't remember what it was called. Anyway, it's not playing with angles. It's not a Dutch shot. It's not over the head or below. So we kind of get to see an actual straight-on view. And there's also this one with Scout, though. Let's look at the first panel first. Demo Man is about 6'2", give or take half an inch, maybe a full inch, you know, around there. And Miss Pauling is about up to his shoulder. This would mean Miss Pauling is around 5'3", if we were to take the comparison between someone who's 5'3" and 6'2". There's also the Scout panel where they're walking away, and she seems to be a little bit closer to his chin, which would mean she's still about 5'3", maybe 5'2", maybe 5'4", but around 5'3". So I think it's safe to say, yeah, that's about how tall she is. As for weight, once again, it's hard to tell. To me, she looks average. So I'll say she's around 19 to 21 BMI, similar to how I did with Saxton Hale, where it went off of BMI instead of weight. She could be heavier or lighter than I'm guessing here, I don't know, but I feel like it's a fair guess that she probably is around in that range. Had she been 19 BMI, she would weigh 107 pounds or 48.53 kilograms, and if she is 21 BMI, she weighs about 118.5 pounds or 53.75 kilograms. We will once again take the average in terms of BMI, saying she is about a 20, which would give us 113 pounds, but we'll round up to 115 pounds or 52.16 kilograms. There we go. Now we know her stats. Time for us to move on to the bench press. I'm going to be honest, assuming she is an average person in terms of raw strength and the TF2 universe isn't pulling a fast one on us, I don't think she's going to be all that good at bench. Yeah, I don't think she's going to bench all that much. First of all, she isn't a very big person, and while she can probably kick the ass of someone twice her size, I don't think she'll be able to do the same on the bench press, as in kicking the bench press's ass. I don't see anything pointing to otherwise in the TF2 comics. There's no moment where she's like lifting 400 pounds over her head, or like where Heavy's lifting the bear, you know, showing that they're in fact extremely strong. No, I don't really see that with Miss Pauling. On top of that, not to be sexist or anything, but she's a woman, which, especially when it comes to bench press, plays a massive role. With squats or deadlift, while the difference between biological men and women is still rather large, with bench press, it is an absolute sweep. This just has to do with biology. Men, on average, carry much more muscle mass in their chest and upper body in general, including their arms and shoulders. This is why the men's bench press world record is 782 pounds, and with several other people, well, 6 other people, benching over 700 pounds, while the women's bench press world record is about 458 pounds. Also, a side note here, since a lot of people actually don't know, that I am talking about the raw bench press world record. So there's a difference between raw and equipped. Basically, the difference is raw, you're allowed, I believe, wrist wraps and a belt, if you would like one. And for the equipped, you're allowed to use a bench shirt and a slingshot if you'd like. I think it depends on the federation. But basically, we're talking about raw here. So yes, there's a difference between raw and equipped. And I am talking about raw here. Okay, let's get back to it. Both enhanced and bench press specialist. By the way, I'm no means saying that's a bad lift. That's almost 150 pounds more than my personal bench press as of June 26th. Yeah, I make these videos way in advance. So yeah, she is at a slight disadvantage. I will say Miss Pauling is likely relatively strong and can likely bench 0.75 times body weight, which for a female isn't too bad. This would mean she can bench 86 pounds, but I will be kind and round it up. Miss Pauling can likely bench press 90 pounds or 40.82 kilograms, which while low, I want to state that this isn't bad for the average person in terms of strength. Maybe even a tad above average, especially for her weight. So good job, Miss Pauling. Time to move on to the squat. Squat is going to be much closer in terms of ratio when compared to men, as women store more muscle and fat in their legs. By the way, this is the last time I'll bring it up, but I wanted to make sure that this is known. Getting a bit of a biology lesson too. Make sure to fact check that. Kidding, but not kidding. Anyway, Miss Pauling likely doesn't have insane leg development or anything. I would presume she's stronger than the average person, say top 40% or so. But she doesn't strike me as a powerlifter, so I think that's probably where I'll draw the line. She is very agile, being able to sneak into places unseen and kind of get around. That's part of her job. So, she's probably decently strong. Though there is this one panel that tells me she likely isn't the strongest. The panel where she kicks Saxton Hale's PSI machine thing, and it reads 37, which is about 1/10 or 1/15 the average, according to this random article on the internet. So maybe she's not the strongest. Though I will give her the benefit of the doubt, and just say it was a bad kick. That thing is relatively high up, close to her head. I think it's actually a little bit above. So, you know, it's kind of hard to get a good kick on it. So, yeah, benefit of the doubt here. I'm going to say top 40% for women that weigh 115 pounds. This would make her squat come out to 155 pounds or 70.3 kilograms. Not terrible. Not terrible. Finally, for the backbreaker, the deadlift, which she 100% pulls conventional, by the way. Or maybe not. I'm kidding. Nobody get mad at me for that. It was just a joke. Kind of. Deadlift is going to be a tough one. I don't think there's any situation where she's lifting a heavy object off the ground in like the comics or anything. I think she's probably just average strength. At least there's nothing I could find. I scrubbed through most of the comics. I didn't see anything. So I'm going to kind of speed run this one. She has long legs, which we could see right here where her belt is. She is not optimal for deadlifting, I will say. I would know. I have long legs as well. Though her arms are kind of average. And the reason I bring this up is a short torso can actually be a good advantage, since it means you don't have to bend over as far. You see, like, okay, so when you're doing a deadlift, right, I'm giving a little bit of a lesson right here, you kind of hinge at your hips. And if you have a long torso, that means you have to bend way over. A short torso makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to bend over as far. So yeah, there is a little bit of advantage to it, but you kind of have to have long arms to make use of it. Miss Pauling doesn't really have long arms, so it kind of just canceled out any real benefit that she could have got from having a short torso. And I will honestly say she can probably lift about 1.5 times body weight, which when rounded up 2.5 pounds, gives her a total of 175 pounds. Maybe it's more and she can actually deadlift like 3 times her body weight? I don't know. Though she doesn't give me that impression. So 175 it is. That's it for Miss Pauling. So far the weakest in terms of raw strength, though she makes up for it in wits and smarts, I guess. You know, not everybody can be a powerlifter. Time for us to move on to our third lifter. This one will be a fun one.
Huzzah! Merasmus the Wizard has come for your souls!
This guy right here. I almost completely forgot about him, to be honest. Almost went right by him, but how could I possibly forget about everyone's favorite wizard and soldier's roommate, Merasmus? Merasmus is such a dorky dude. Supposed to be all threatening, but he's almost been whacked by the Russian mafia. I believe he owed the Japanese mafia money. Always owing somebody money. And he's just really not all that threatening. But we're not talking about his character. Let's talk about his build. First is age. I guess this doesn't really have to do with build per se. But anyway, according to Merasmus himself, he is 6,000 years old. I have no other way to verify this, so I'm going to say that this is true and that he is in fact 6,000 years old. He had almost 6,000 years to train, so hopefully his lifts are up to par. Now for height and weight. For height, there's a lot of different answers. I'm going based off his normal form first and foremost, not when he turns green and starts shooting bombs from his book. You know what I'm talking about, you know, during Ghost Fort, the hour-long match. Yeah, I've heard a lot of different answers for his normal form. Most say he's around 6'9". But from these panels, he seems to be just a bit taller than Soldier. This panel right here, I believe, is the best. We could see him in a door frame or right next to this door frame. In the US, which is where Team Fortress 2 takes place, you know, New Mexico, an average door frame is 6 feet 8 inches, or about 203 centimeters. He's probably 2 to 4 inches shorter than that. This would make him about 6'4 to 6'6", which I think is pretty reasonable. We'll take the highest number and say he is 6'6", or 2 inches taller than Comics Hale, 4 inches shorter than in-game Hale, if that helps put it into perspective. 1 inch taller than Heavy. I guess that would actually be the much better answer, but whatever, I'm leaving that in. For weight, the dude is a goddamn string bean. He likely weighs more than the average person due to his stature, but he doesn't weigh all that much. Assuming he has normal human anatomy, I would say he weighs anywhere from like 160, or about 72.6 kilograms, up to 180, or 81.6 kilograms. That may sound low for someone his height, but once again, just look at Merasmus. The dude's frame is akin to a table lamp. The cloak often hides it, but in the comics, we can see how thin and scrawny Merasmus truly is. Maybe that's why he gets roughed up so easily by the Russian mafia. I don't know, just a guess. That will do it for basic information. Time for our man Merasmus to chalk up and head over to the bench. Bench press. Assuming once again that Merasmus is in his normal form and doesn't use the dark arts of the Abominomicon in order to press 2 forward 150s, I'm leaning towards his bench not being his friend, like many people in his life. Merasmus has no real mass whatsoever. Seeing that he is 6,000 years old, it isn't too surprising. Maybe he was a hunk of a man back in the day, but now he's kind of just an old man. Thin arms that probably won't help him support the weight all that much. No real chest development from what I can see. Maybe once again, he had good chest development, but now he doesn't. Chicken legs, which we'll talk more about when we get to squat. But for bench press, this means his leg drive isn't going to be all that great. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it does help to have good leg drive, and if you have weak legs, guess what? Merasmus is going to be pretty weak. Once again, assuming he doesn't use his magic wizard powers to cheat, honestly, I'm giving him a plate. That is the bar, plus 45 on each side for a total of 135 pounds, or about 61.2 kilograms. It could be the bar alone, with my original guess being 65 pounds, or the bar and a 10 on each side. It could be more than 135, maybe he benches 4 plates, I don't know. Not 100% sure, but without magic, I can't imagine him being able to do more than that. I know he can hold up the Abominomicon, but that's only in his magic state. I'm assuming that that book weighs about 75 to 100 pounds, which is pretty impressive that he's able to lift it with such ease. So yeah, he could probably lift a decent amount in that state, but otherwise I think the plate is going to be around his max, which isn't terrible, especially for someone his age. Well, I'd assume someone who's about 6,000 years old. But for his frame, he should probably be able to do a little bit more than that. Look at me making up numbers and giving him crap about it, without knowing if it's actually true, whatever. Let's just move on to the squat. Remember when I was talking about chicken legs? Yeah, Merasmus has 2 drumsticks to walk on. He isn't going to be able to squat all that much. Honestly, I think Merasmus is one of those dudes to put on way too much weight and only half squat it and call it a PR. One ass cheek lower than the other, doing more of a good morning rather than a squat. You know the type. Merasmus doesn't have super long legs, but he is very tall. Like we stated, probably around 6'6". Tall guys are not the biggest fan of squats, from what I've seen. Typically, being taller means that you have 1, more range of motion, longer levers, and it makes the movement just a teeny bit more awkward. And this isn't cope. Well, I'm not super tall myself, so I guess I can't say for sure, but there are some truths to it. It's kind of like the whole thing where the guy who weighs 120 pounds soaking wet says to the 225-pound fasted dude, pull-ups are a bodyweight exercise. You should be able to do as many as I can. You're just weak. You're not putting in the effort. But most know that there's a sort of exponential curve. I can get into the nitty-gritty of you need a certain amount of fat to sustain that amount of muscle, because when you lower your calories to shred fat, some of that muscle will come with it. Or there's more to carry as your body is relatively bigger. I mean, there's a lot of ways I can kind of explain it, but pretty much being taller is going to make the squat a lot more awkward. And because Merasmus hasn't filled out his frame 100% and he's pretty skinny, it's going to make it even worse. Either way, him being tall will make things a bit harder. I'm going to say that he could squat just above body weight with a plate and a 25, coming out to 185 pounds or 83.9 kilograms, which I think is pretty fair. Maybe back in the day that was his front rack pistol squat, but now I think it's his max. Not too bad though, especially once again for someone his age. For deadlift, well, I imagine due to his age, once again, he pulls conventional, because, you know, like a man. Actually, to be honest, I doubt he pulls at all. Definitely a glass back, but let's just say he does deadlift. Long legs, but decently long arms. So that kind of cancels it out, you know. He does actually have a pretty adequate build for deadlift. Once again, back in his heyday, I can actually imagine Merasmus being a good puller, not even joking. While he is tall and that doesn't help, he has a build for a super puller. I'm going to keep this segment pretty short. I don't really want to go over, I can only say the same thing so many times. I know I already have. Merasmus can likely deadlift 2 plates, 225, or 102.1 kilograms for you know, non-patriots. Reasonable for his age, build, weight, etc. That will do it for everyone's favorite clumsy wizard. It is time for us to move on to our 4th contestant. Who do you think it will be? Ooh.
Butchered them like hogs. Their screams died on their lips.
For our 4th contestant, bringing on the fan favorite of Heavy Sisters, Zana. Zana is a beast of a woman. She is definitely going to put up some very impressive numbers, rivaling many of the TF2 mercs themselves. Let us start off with age. Okay, so I originally thought this was going to be difficult. Turns out it was not. So this is our best panel for judging the age of Zana. First, I originally mistaked this biggest sister for Zana, but it seems that Zana was actually the youngest. I missed that. That's what most people are saying. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I'm going to take that as it is. And if I'm wrong, sorry, but I'm going to go with that. It also turns out that I forgot a big piece of lore. The breaking out of the gulag part of you gotta read the comics to understand. But anyway, it happened in 1941. We have an exact date. She is about 2 to 3 years old in 1941. The TF2 comics take place around 1971, 1972 because of Gray Man, so it has to take place in the early 70s. This means that if she was a toddler in 1941, born in 1939, she would be in her early 30s, approximately 31 to 33. And maybe in her late 20s in the late 1960s, but I don't believe the comics have any times where that takes place. So, yeah, about 31 to 33 when we see her for the first time. So there you go. I could be wrong, but this actually makes a lot of sense. Height was actually a very difficult one. She's a character they play angles with quite a bit. They always portray her as very tall, very big, and sort of like intimidating, you know, especially when we first meet her. So she's somewhere around 6 feet. She constantly is around Soldier, so I'll use him as a base. Soldier is about 6 feet tall, which is perfect. Sometimes she seems quite a bit taller than Soldier, like 2 to 3 inches. Sometimes she seems like she's the exact same height, and sometimes she's even a little bit shorter than Soldier is. A lot of the time she is taller than him though. It seems like an artistic choice to show that she's like a massive woman, whereas in the normal panels, you know, she seems a little more, I wouldn't say average, but not the human equivalent of a 1960s refrigerator. This isn't meant to be mean, by the way. It's just, I mean, Heavy's family, Jesus. This is probably the best panel because they're all standing pretty much straight up, and there's no really weird angles at play. She's probably 4 to 5 inches shorter than Heavy, and about the same height, if not an inch taller than Soldier. Also, this panel, despite being one of the more interesting parts of the comic, standing next to Miss Pauling, and we know Miss Pauling is around 5'3", standing next to her, Miss Pauling comes up to her neck and shoulder area. This would mean Zana is probably around 6'1", and this would work for both instances, where she's 4 to 5 inches shorter than Heavy, and also a little bit taller than Miss Pauling. 6'1" seems about right, so I think that's what I'm going to go with. For weight, this one was a really tough one. Once again, using this panel, we could see that little is left up to the imagination. She is not fat, maybe a bit overweight, but that's more due to her size in general. For someone who's 6'1" and has her general body shape, I would say the low end of Zana's weight, she probably would weigh about 195 pounds or 88.5 kilograms. That sounds like a lot, but look at the way Zana is built. For my high-end guess, I'd say probably 210-ish or 95.3 kilograms. For someone who's 6'1", this is in the overweight category, but having really any form of muscle mass is going to put you in this category, so it's not a bad thing. Alright, Zana, step up for your first lift. Zana is obviously freakishly strong, just like her brother. Runs in the family, I guess. Well, maybe not runs per se. Sorry. For bench press, I am going to say that Zana is quite good at it, at least when she gets her hand back. Her upper body is pretty proportional to the average person, though that's the thing, she isn't the average person. She is quite large and can probably move a fair amount of weight. Assuming Zana doesn't have any special powers, I believe that she'll be an elite bencher, especially with all the time she spent in Siberia. They've got to have a gym set up somewhere. For someone of her stature and size with an elite bench press, this means she would be able to bench 260 pounds or 117.9 kilograms. This is far from average for the average woman. I would say the average woman is probably not even benching a plate, maybe a plate in their lifetime, and she doesn't just do one plate, she does 2 plates, adds a 10, adds a 5, and adds a 2.5 and says, screw it, I'm gonna bench this. Remember, women are at kind of a disadvantage from the start when it comes to upper body movements. I've already explained that. But even then, 260 pounds is nothing to scoff at. And if we weren't using the TF2 universe argument, I think this is a pretty reasonable guess. Squat? She's gonna excel. I'm not saying this to be a weirdo. She pretty much has the perfect build for squats. A strong upper body for support, thick quads, proportional calves, strong core, and proportional legs. This is pretty much everything you would want when you're wishing to be a squat savant for whatever reason. Her upper body being strong means her back won't be a limiting factor, as some people have really weak backs, they might round too far forward. You gotta have kind of a strong back to stay upright. Thick quads is obvious, as it's one of the main drivers of the lift. You need to have decent calves because that's what actually holds you up. I mean, just imagine you have big old quads but you got like basically nothing for calves. That's your foundation right there. So you have to have decent calves as well. Though, you know, calves kind of usually it's going to be proportionate to you anyway. I mean, unless you're just very genetically disadvantaged or very genetically gifted. But either way, she has decent calves. Nothing like insane, but like pretty good. Then the strong core is necessary as well because it will help you brace more efficiently. Squat is going to be her best lift, no doubt. Knowing Heavy can lift up a bear and support its weight, likely so can Zana. Though I don't know if that's 100% true. You know, maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, like her bench, she likely has an elite squat. So I'm going to say that Zana can likely lift 4 plates, 405, or 187.3 kilograms, which would be very, very good. Most guys, big guys even, probably won't squat 405 pounds in their lifetime. I mean, unless they're relatively dedicated, but still, 405 pounds, really good. Finally, to cap it off, we have the deadlift. I think she'll have a decent deadlift. Don't get me wrong. When she has two hands, at least. But I don't think it's going to be as great in terms of equivalency. I think it's going to be her biggest lift, no doubt, in terms of raw numbers, but I don't think it's going to be her best. Her proportions are actually pretty good for deadlift, being on the bigger side, but the thing is she also has proportionate arms and legs. She doesn't really have the deadlift build, as some would call it. The deadlift build being a shorter torso, which she kind of has, but she has average arms. Doesn't have very long arms. Having long arms is a huge advantage for deadlift, because you don't have to bring the bar up as high. It's how leverages work. By no means am I saying she couldn't lift a ton of weight. I'm just going to say that when it comes to deadlift, she probably can slap on like an extra 25 to each side compared to her squat, pulling a total of 455 pounds or 206.4 kilograms. Very impressive. Nothing to scoff at once again. Zana is probably one of the strongest characters that we'll look at today. I can only think of one person who might have her beat, other than of course Saxton Hale, but Saxton Hale is in a league of his own. But even then, I can't say for certain. So let's actually take a look at this person, shall we?
None of them survived more than a week out there with me. We made it look so easy.
Maggie is probably a character that many of you have forgot about or never even heard of. She was an old girlfriend of Saxton Hale before shenanigans happened. You'd have to read the comics. Her and Hale have been seen beating up jungle animals together. Basically Hale, but with an extra X chromosome. And minus the Y, never mind. Let's start off with age. Maggie appears to be around the same age as Hale. I could be wrong, but seeing as young Hale was present and she looked around the same age as him, and they aged the same, it is safe to say that Maggie would be around 40 years old, just like Hale. Height and weight. For height, it is one of those characters that kind of changes a lot, because she doesn't appear outside the comics. The Team Fortress 2 mercs, they have in-game models, so they don't change in size, but when it comes to the comics, they often will play with angles. Sometimes a character may seem taller or shorter than another one. I use this panel to display Maggie's height, as it doesn't seem to play any angles or anything. I guess it's slightly panned up, but it's pretty much the best I can do. Hale in the comics is around 6'4", Heavy is around 6'5", and Scout is around 5'9.5". She comes up to the shoulder of Heavy, approximately, and seems to be the same height, if not a tad taller than Scout. I'm leaning toward a little bit taller. I'm going to say that Maggie, or Margaret, is around 5'10", or 177.8 centimeters. And finally, weight. When she was young, she seemed to be on the thinner side. In her older years, she still is, I guess, but seems to be a bit bigger. A tad. Kind of what happens with aging, typically. Either way, not fat, but maybe a tad overweight. Though I would say that's more to do with exercising and choking out tigers than any true fat mass. It doesn't seem like fat, and more like a mixture of muscle and fat. If we're being realistic, Maggie is between 170 and 180 pounds, so we'll list her at 175 pounds. Is that all? Yep. Let's move to the lifts. Maggie is the female version of Saxton Hale. We already know she fights panthers and other animals, so she has quite a bit of strength. But how much exactly? Does this really translate to the bench press? I'm going to go off a limb here and say that Maggie probably trains quite consistently. There is a chance that her only training comes from kicking the asses of inferior beings, but it is likely that she does some sort of weight training on the side. I mean, it just makes sense, seeing who she is. Maggie actually has a pretty good build for benching. A thick upper body with broad shoulders. Even though it's close, I would honestly say she rivals Sana in that respect. Maggie doesn't have egregiously long arms, so there's no disadvantage there. She has pretty average arms. Maggie is going to be far above average, and probably even above the average of an elite bench presser. This is a shot in the dark, but I can say that at minimum, she can probably bench 3 plates, 315, or 142.9 kilograms. This is what most dedicated gym bros hope to hit. It wouldn't surprise me if Maggie could do the same. Squat. She'll be pretty good at it. She has pretty thick legs, so she'll have good support, but she isn't built for squats like Zana is. I mean, she's still got a good build overall, but not as much as Anna. Let's go through the obligatory. Thick quads and solid leg development all around. She has a thick upper body that will help her actually support the weight. Need this, because if you don't have a strong enough upper body to support the weight, how will you ever be able to squat it? Answer, you can't. But Maggie can. Has a pretty good upper body, probably can support a vast amount of weight. However, these are assumptions based on how she looks and what we know about her past and drawing parallels. There is nothing in the comics that tells me she has stupidly strong legs or some sort of power like Hale. Hale has the earthquake ability, so maybe Maggie does too, but who knows. With all that yapping done, I am going to guess that Maggie can likely squat 4 plates and a 25 on each side for a total of 455 pounds or 206.4 kilograms. Capping it off with deadlift. Deadlift is going to be her best lift. I don't mean just that in terms of raw numbers. I mean, in general, it's going to be her best lift. I guess maybe bench is close. She likely trains it quite a bit. She doesn't have the deadlift build, but can make up for any disadvantage through pure will and grit. She could choke out tigers, so her forearm, and therefore grip strength, is probably pretty good. She doesn't have soft hands, brother. Strong legs will also help with the hinge, and a strong back will support with the pulling and actual support of the weight. Maggie, if she were real, would be relatively close to the current record holder, I'd assume. Being close to Tamara Walcott, I believe that is the current raw deadlift record holder at about 639 pounds in competition, but I have seen that she pulled 641 pounds or 290.8 kilograms outside of competition. So, back to Maggie. I'm going to keep it simple and say Maggie would probably trail Tamara by 40 pounds with a deadlift of 600 sumo. Personally, I believe she has a pretty good sumo build, and could probably still pull 550 conventional. Though we'll stick with the 600 since sumo is unfortunately allowed in competition. That's a joke. That will do it for Mags. She definitely did rival Zana despite the size difference. Maggie is just built different. With that done, on to the 6th competitor. Won't you step up?
I hope you'll enjoy hell, Plutarch. Yes, I'll enjoy staring down at it from heaven while you burn, brother! No!
We actually have 3 competitors. I decided to lump them together as the Man Brothers. Chances are they don't look the exact same, but seeing how they look, it's probably pretty close. And imagine if I did split them up. We would have to do a segment on Redmond, and then a separate segment on Plutarch, where the numbers are damn near the same if not the same, and then one on Gray Man as well. It's too much. So I'm just going to lump them together as Man Brothers. First, we have to decide which age we want to use. We see them at multiple different stages in their life, from young men to old men to ancient. Which age are we going to use? I'm going to make an exception for these guys. I'm going to use their younger versions rather than their older versions. Because in their very old state, they probably couldn't even squat or deadlift, let alone get out of their wheelchair, and would likely get crushed by the weight of the bar on the bench press. So it's unfair. We're going to use their younger selves. Plus, I just don't think using their older ages would be all that entertaining, since it would be pretty much 0, 0, maybe 20 pounds. Right? So we'll use their youngest selves. In 1850, when we see them for the first time, it's impossible to say how old they are for sure. Except it's actually not impossible, because it turns out that we actually do have an exact date. They were born in 1922, which would make them about 30 years old. Technically 28, but we'll say they're around 30. Since they're triplets, they're all 30. The only one we see standing is Gray Man. Of course, siblings aren't always the exact same height, but for this purpose, let's just say they are. Gray Man seems to change size occasionally, appearing old and frail in some panels and not so much in others. In this panel, we can see him next to Hale, standing with good posture. He's standing a bit above Hale on an incline, and Hale is slightly slouched. Hale in the comics, like we established, is probably around 6'4", 6'5", despite being 6'10" in game. This would mean Gray Man is probably about the same height, and so are the brothers most likely. Maybe not, but I think it would be pretty close. Let's say the Man brothers are between 6'2" and 6'4". And not to draw this segment out too long, someone of their height and build would likely be approximately 200 pounds, the range being between 185 and 215. They're tall, so they'll weigh a good amount, but they're also pretty thin. They're not real thin like Merasmus is, but they are on the skinnier side, so I think 200 pounds is about right. Now that all of this is established, let's head over to the bench. It's not going to be much. I'm going to say right off the bat that these three probably are not the strongest in general. Not talking bench press exclusively, just as a whole. These dudes would probably crumble if a bird were to shit on their shoulder. Slight exaggeration, but I don't imagine they'll be super strong. They've got kind of long arms. Not much more than average, but they're slightly longer wingspans than the average person. They don't have very wide backs or any chest that I can really see. They're just built average. A bit taller than average, but nothing too insane. I have to bring this up before somebody does. I just want to kind of get this out of the way. I stated that we're looking at their 1850s versions. However, the bench press technically wasn't a thing until the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the bench press wouldn't even be a staple of bodybuilding or any sort of sport until around the 1930s or 1940s. It is partially why Bronze Age bodybuilders actually have weak chests in terms of volume. Plutarch, Redmond, and Gray may not have benched had it been this reality, though in the TF2 universe where Lincoln was the original pyro, Australia was what we imagine the year 2100 looked like back in 1899, and rocket jumping was preferred over stairs, I think it's fair to say that the bench press existing earlier than it does in our world is pretty likely. With that history lesson out of the way, it's time for a guess. The Mann brothers are probably novice lifters, if they lift at all. I'm going to assume that they do at least a little bit, and I'm going to say that they could probably collectively bench a plate and a 25, or 185 pounds, 83.9 kilograms. I think Gray Man might be able to get like 190, and maybe Plutarch gets something like 180. I don't know. But if these men were real, they probably average about 185 pounds. That's it for bench. Time for squat. It's going to be a similar story to Marasmus. Unless you're built like the Hulk or Saxton Hale, being tall and especially tall and skinny makes squat a bit tougher to perform. Like I've said, they have an average build. They have very average legs, so nothing special, but nothing bad either. They don't have a huge upper body, which means they likely can't support tremendous amounts of weight. They'll probably still do an okay amount, but not more than average. I think they'll do about the same as a novice lifter, assuming that they do any form of actual lifting, which I have stated that I'm assuming they have at least done something. Which, for their weight, them being novice at 200 pounds, would mean they could probably squat around 245 pounds, but I'll bump them up an extra 10 pounds because 245 just doesn't sound right. So the Mann brothers could probably squat about 255 pounds or 115.7 kilograms. It's not terrible. To cap off Redmond, Plutarch, and Gray Man's powerlifting meet, we have the deadlift, where once again I don't think it would be anything too special. They don't look like sloths or couch potatoes, but they probably didn't train the deadlift, but maybe they did. We'll just assume they did. Guy of their stature, guy of their weight, how would they do? With average arms, average legs, and their height, I think they'll be novice at deadlifting and could probably put up about 305 pounds or 138.3 kilograms. This might be my upright row bottom set, but for the average dude, 305 pounds is respectable. It's not bad. The Mann brothers are done. They fought over gravel and have fought over the title, but they kind of suck. 7th, or rather 9th, I guess, but we'll go with 7th, since I combined them. Moving on to our 7th competitor, here we go.
Competition begins in 10 seconds. Time to fight!
I know some of you were waiting for this character right here. Don't worry, I didn't forget. Leaving her out of a video like this would be an absolute crime. Of course she had to be included. So just like every other character, let's go over the stats here. The administrator is old. Not exactly sure how old. I've done some looking, and some say she was born around the same time as the Mann brothers in the early 1820s, though some point more towards the 1850s, 1860s. The comics are weird, especially with the Elizabeth character thrown in the mix. I couldn't get an exact answer. Maybe it's out there and I just completely missed it. It's kind of a mess, but we're just going to say that Helen is around 120 to 150 years old or so. Just about 120, average. Though, I think it's only fair that we use Helen, or the administrator's, younger version, which we see at the end of the 6th comic. This video also just happens to be recorded about 4 to 5 days after the unofficial announcing of the 7th TF2 comic. It seems real, I hope it's real. We'll see where they go with that anyway. I just thought I'd bring that up since it's kind of funny. I happen to be doing the announcers, or the administrators segment right after that. I've been going on too long. So Helen's around 120, 150, but she looks to be about 30 in her Australian-infused younger version, so we'll go with that. We'll say she's about 30. Height and weight. Height is kind of difficult here. It seems to change occasionally, like many comic characters. You know, you got Heavy, who seems to be taller sometimes. Scout seems a little bit more short and scrawny. Hale changes a little bit, but usually it's more like 2 to 4 inches. But the thing is, the Administrator, especially in the early comics and the catch-up comics, seems to be pretty tall and slender. In those panels specifically, she seems to be around 5'10" or 5'11". But in these panels of the 4th comic specifically, we can see Miss Pauling and the Administrator standing next to each other. During these panels, they seem to be about the same height. There's a very small difference between these two, but I think it's pretty negligible, if there even is one. If she is the same height as Miss Pauling, that would make her about 5'3". So what are we going to do here? Since we're using her de-aged version, the de-aged version of the Administrator, we'll chalk it up to her shrinking over time in that she is in fact around 5'10", and just managed to shrink about 7 inches. Admin is also rather slender. If we use her older version, it wouldn't surprise me if she's close to 100 pounds flat, though when she was younger, or de-aged, she would probably be around 130 to 135 pounds or so. That just seems about right to me. Alright, Admin. You've gotten out of it long enough. It's time for you to join the fight, or rather the competition. Whatever, just get over to the bench, ma'am. I'm just going to come out and say it. She isn't going to be very good at bench press, for a multitude of reasons. The first one's pretty obvious, but I don't think I need to bring it up again. If you've been listening to me about in the other segments, you'll know exactly what I'm getting at here. But we'll look at what we do have. She doesn't have any of the qualities of a bencher. She doesn't have short arms, thick upper body, nothing. She's rather slender. She's not going to put up any crazy numbers that would just wow you. I'm going to say the Administrator could probably put up about the same as her assistant, honestly. About 90 pounds, maybe? Honestly, it could be as low as 60 pounds, but I'm going to say 90 since saying she couldn't lift much more than the bar might come off is kind of insulting. So I'll say that she can probably lift about 90 pounds or 40.8 kilograms, which can be done by someone of her size relatively soon. I don't think it would take that long. It wouldn't take that much lifting. And that's just assuming that the Administrator lifts, which, once again, it could be a lot worse. Anyway. The squad is next, because that's how I've been doing the entire video. Once again, nothing special here. I honestly think the admin will be below average for this one. She doesn't have the build for it. She has long legs and is rather slender. While this could be a good thing for someone who's a deadlift specialist, it is nearly the antithesis for a natural-born squat savant. So it's not looking good for her. I'd honestly say her assistant probably could lift more than the admin when it comes to squat, because at least she's shorter, a little stubbier, will help with leverages and stuff. The Administrator will not have a great time doing this lift right here. I'll give admin at most a plate. Even that could be pushing it, but I think her younger self could probably achieve this. So there you have it, a squat of 135 pounds or 61.2 kilograms in the books for Helen. Now for deadlift. This is where I think she'll shine. She's a lanky person, which, while it screws her over a bit in the other two lifts, could actually be an advantage for her, especially if she pulls sumo. Conventional would still be alright, but sumo is where the Administrator is going to do very well. I'm not going to go over everything again, so I'll just make a prediction. The admin could probably pull about 205 pounds, or just under 93 kilograms. Like legit just under, I think it's like 92.9 kilograms, something like that. This would not be a bad pull for anyone, and especially someone like admin, so pretty decent. And who knows, maybe she is a powerlifter, or she was a powerlifter back in the day, and that's actually her warm-up bench, but I think 205 pounds is pretty reasonable for her in her 30s. That will do it for admin. Let's meet our second to last competitor. I was having trouble figuring out who I wanted to be, and there may be someone better, but I think this one will be kind of interesting. I don't think it's who you think I'm going to pick.
I suspect you misunderstood her. Like you misunderstand everything. God, you're useless.
I already picked out who I wanted to be in the 9th spot, though the 8th spot was a bit difficult. When I originally recorded the I bet it isn't who you think it's going to be, I was going to do the Horseless Headless Horseman Halloween boss, though I felt that was a little bit too out there and wouldn't be that interesting. Another pick was going to be maybe Mr. Bidwell, Mr. Reedy, Trevor, Mirror Mike, the Civilian, and a bunch of other people were considered, though I decided to go with the director, as I didn't feel it was too outlandish and it could be kind of interesting to talk about. The horseless headless horseman might be a bit too much, but the director could be interesting, and some of you might not even know who the director is. So here we go. The director seems to be an older gentleman, showed by the white streaks in his hair. Like most characters, there is no exact, but if we were to make a guess, I'd say he's about 45 years old. He's in his 40s for sure. Maybe 50, but honestly I'm thinking more mid-40s than anything. Height was relatively easy. We have a shot of him next to Miss Pauling and a shot of him next to Soldier. He seems to be a tad shorter than Soldier, who's about 6 feet tall, and while I can't say exactly how tall he is, I'm guessing that he's about an inch or half an inch shorter than Soldier is. For weight, he's a very scrawny guy. I don't think he'll weigh all that much. The clothes might weigh more than him. The director is 5'11", and his general shape would put him anywhere in the low end of about 130 pounds, or 54.43 kilograms, and maybe up to 150 pounds, or 68.04 kilograms. So we'll do like we always do, and just take the average, going up to 140 pounds, or 63.5 kilograms. Let's continue forth to the bench. Man, it's been a while since we've seen a solid bench. I'm going to tell you right now, this string bean is not putting up anything that great. Probably couldn't even unrack a plate. Well, maybe. Anyway, the director is a bit of a dorky dude, slender and kind of, I don't know, he just gives off that nerdy vibe. Doesn't give me the impression that he works out at all, or if he does, he prefers something like Pilates or Buso ball training, which is fine, but it doesn't help you for pumping tremendous amounts of iron. The director has such a skinny frame that if he was to miss a lift with the bar, he'd probably be out of commission for a couple of years since it snapped him in half. Okay, we've been dogging on this guy for long enough. What can he lift? Well, not much. He's pretty scrawny and I presume rather weak. I'd say the director can likely lift about 105 pounds or 47.63 kilograms given his build. I know I just joked about him dying beneath the weight of the bar, but in reality he probably could lift about 105 pounds. Pretty much any male, any guy with some training would be able to do this unless they had a disability or were too old or too young. Of course there are exceptions, but in general, if you're a guy, 140 pounds, 105 is pretty reasonable. It's not elite, but it's par for the course when it comes to somebody like him who's probably a beginner. Squat. I think it's going to be the same as the administrator, maybe not in terms of weight, but kind of the issues. Squat is best suited for someone who has more of a boxy frame, thicker legs, maybe a bit shorter legs and longer torso, something like that. It's not required, but it does help. The director doesn't have this by any means, so it's not going to be his best lift, I can tell you that right now. Long skinny legs that would be like trying to walk on stilts, and a glass back that would break under the pressure of a normal fit t-shirt. I'm being a little bit extra for the director, but in all honesty, he's just not going to do that good. I'd say that if the director were to do low bar and go to parallel, he might be able to squeeze out about 185 pounds or 83.9 kilograms. It could be a bit lower, but I really don't imagine it being much higher. Unless the director has that sleeper build, which is possible. I have seen people built very similarly to the director that actually put up tremendous amount of weight, but I just don't imagine that for him. So otherwise, he's not going to be anything special. And let's end it off on what's probably going to be his best lift, the deadlift. Also, like the administrator, his deadlift may not be the worst. Still, the director is not all that strong of a dude, so I'm going to go off on a limb and say that the final number will not be all that great, to be honest. To keep things moving, I'm just going to say that, conventionally this man could probably, get 210, 215. But because we allow sumo deadlifts, and the sumo deadlifts allow for quicker progression on your lifts before eventually conventional will begin to beat it, we're not going to get into that. If you lift, you already know what I'm talking about. I'd say you can lift anywhere between about 2 plates and 2 plates plus a 10. Taking the average of that gives us 235 pounds or 105.59 kilograms for the director performing a sumo deadlift. Okay, that is it for String Bean. It's time for us to move on to our very last character. I think you guys are going to guess this one, and I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of you were streaming at your screen the entire time because I haven't talked about this character yet. But anyway, number 9, here we go.
Well, off to visit your mother. Oh.
Of course we have to include Scout's mom in the competition. What kind of person would I be if I didn't? Let's start off with age. We know that Scout is 23 in game, or about 27 by the time the comics take place. So if we assume that Scout's mom was at least 20 when she had him, she would be around her late 40s to early 50s. About the same age as Spy. Interesting. But yeah, around the late 40s. For height, we have this picture of the Spy and Scout's mom walking off into the sunset. We know that Spy is just a tad bit over 6 foot, around 6'1" or so. Knowing that, Scout's mom would be around 5'7" or 5'8", on the taller side, but nothing too outlandish. For someone of her size, she is likely going to weigh between 120 and 140 pounds, with an average of 130 pounds. She's on the slimmer side, but not skin and bones. This would probably be about right. I've said it 8 times, and I'll say it 9 times. Let's get into the bench for our final competitor today. So we could be done, you could go back to watching Smiling Friends Season 2 or other Dr. Medic videos. Let's go. The bench press. Do I need to say it again? I don't think you guys want to hear me say it again. I'm like a broken record at this point. It's honestly getting out of hand how many times I've said the same thing, word for word, bar for bar, when it comes to bench press PRs. Scout's mom is a lot like Scout. Makes sense. Skinny, long arms, a woman, narrow-shouldered. She has nothing that makes a good bencher good. I'm sorry to say it. She might be the worst bencher out of everyone. I'm just going to give her a little bit more than the average novice lifter of her size and say she could probably bench press about 70 pounds or 31.75 kilograms, though it honestly could be as low as the bar. Just a bit more than Scout himself. Kidding. But seriously, nothing against Scout's mom specifically. She just isn't going to be that good at bench pressing. She's got nothing that makes a good bench press good. The squat is next up, and what do you think? She has no strong upper body, like some of the other characters, so the weight is not going to be well supported, and of course you need a strong upper body to support the weight. She's quite frail, so nope, not going to be her thing in the slightest. She's going to struggle a lot when it comes to the squat. I'll say that it will be comparatively better than her bench press was, but still subpar. I think that Scout's mom will be able to squat about 125 pounds or 56.7 kilograms. I would have said just a plate, but to be honest, I think that might actually be a bit too high. Of course, I could be wrong, but I think that Scout's mother would probably put up about 125 solid-ass pounds. To cap it off, the last lift we have to look at for this entire video is the deadlift. Now, like her son and some of the other characters I talked about, I think this will be her best lift. I think she's a sumo puller, but probably would still do okay in the conventional style. I think that Scout's mom, when it comes to other lifts, is kind of a novice tier lifter for the most part. However, when it comes to the deadlift, I think she's more like intermediate, low intermediate, but still intermediate. And while I don't think she's going to do as well as the administrator, I think she will still do quite well and be rather close. Honestly, I'll give Scout's mom 195 pounds or 88.45 kilograms in the sumo position and more like 175 in conventional. But sumo is allowed, so we'll go with the higher number, 195 pounds. That will do it. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for sticking around. Did you like the video? Let me know what you thought. Was I right with my guesses? Were any way off? I know Saxton Hale was the hardest one for me, because on one hand, if you were real, the numbers would be probably a lot lower, since nobody's really built like Hale. Or I guess there are people kind of built like Hale, but the numbers are way lower. But also, if we were to assume he had his abilities, then I think the numbers were correct. It's a mess. One more thing before I let you go. I know I lost a good chunk of people already, but if you're here, would you be interested in the part 3 where I go over even more characters? I'm thinking of doing it in the way future, but if you guys are interested, I would push it up and make it way sooner. I don't want to make the video if it isn't something you guys are interested in, but if it is, I'm more than happy in choosing 9 more characters to go over. Let me know down below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.